Well, I don't know if you can see this, but you know, everything's kind of steaming here in Comox at the moment in the sunshine after a fair amount of rain, and thought I might take a walk along the Bay Community Church potential prayer trail. And it's already a trail. We haven't made it a prayer trail yet, but that's certainly the intent. And I'm going to start you out from the beginning, and at that particular point just going to walk you through it and sort of I suppose ramble on our way, just for actually an orientation here. Down, or rather you could say up the hill there is towards Highland School in Comox, where you know they have some fairly famous alma mater by the name of Jody Wilson-Raybould, I guess you could say, former Canadian Attorney General. Down that way and around the corner where the roundabout is actually the airport at Comox, and this is Pritchard Road. So we're entering here what will become the new prayer trail. This would be the actual gate area, you could say. And we made it straight to go through in the beginning because we wanted to actually talk a little bit about the biblical text of you know, the concept of the straight and the narrow. And we have plans actually here, right in front here, for a kind of cross-shaped gate, so that when you enter into the trail, you literally are going through a gate that says, "I am the gate," and hopefully that'll be meaningful for folks. And I'll take you along the way here, so get out of traffic a little bit and get into the actual place itself, for the trail itself. The trail is about 400 plus meters long. It's not particularly lengthy, but in the Comox River, or the Comox Valley area, I should say, there are an awful lot of trail walkers and people who are biking trails as well. And we kind of think that it might be meaningful to add a Christian spiritual dimension to this particular trail. And so signage will be going up this year, basically reminding people of various scriptural texts that connect actually the meaning of the scriptures to even a trail such as this. And there's loads of avenues for thinking biblically and thinking theologically along the line, and we hope to exploit them all, I guess you could say, or at least as many as we can over the course of years as we build up the infrastructure of the trail to make it increasingly meaningful for people who walk along it. At least that's the hope. So we actually made it a little bit meandering because, of course, you know, as you pray and as you ponder and as you think, it's kind of nice to actually go for a walk that isn't always necessarily the shortest distance between 2 points. And of course, you know, there's potentially embedded meaning along all of this in some respects. Like we're going to actually probably do some interesting clarification here come the time. Just for those folks who'd like to think about it, this is a western red cedar that is in front of me directly. A western red cedar, you could connect biblically to, of course, the cedars of Lebanon, but there's a funny problem. The cedars of Lebanon are actually pines and not cedars. So in some respects you have to be careful in terms of signage, but we want to be able to clear even some of the botany questions that come up from scripture. For example, straight ahead of me here is a fairly reasonable and healthy looking Douglas fir. Douglas firs are actually pines. So believe it or not, there's more in common with the Douglas fir there to a cedar of Lebanon biblically than there is a western red cedar, which is actually a cypress. But we do have opportunities because, of course, this is not going to be just a prayer trail. It's also going to be a prayer garden, which is up that area as well. So, you know, we may plant some actual Eastern Mediterranean cypress to show the connection there between the cedar and the cypress, and, you know, build a kind of a meaning in terms of the botany that way. This is the first actual area where there's a drainage area here, and so we wanted to build a bridge here just in case it gets you across, you know, ground that when it's at its wettest it can be a little bit soggy. So we'll be building a bridge here. And you know, the funny thing is that even when you think about moments like this, there's a possibility here of talking about that fairly famous metaphor of the cross of Christ being like a bridge that you know, brings the people from a condition of sin into a condition of salvation. So we might actually make this particular bridge a metaphor for that particular avenue and meaning. If we can build a cross-shaped dimension into it, maybe in the center of it, because we have a little bit more options in terms of handrail elements here than we might have on the far side where we have to pass over another ravine that is deeper and actually has water in it. It's a beautiful day once again today, and a nice day to ponder and muse about these things. We had a bit of a blow, so we've been removing a little bit of some of the pine cones and branches that fell. And remind me when we actually go to dedicate this prayer, I'll have to pray for folks' safety, just in case any come in here to pray during times where the wind is blowing, just for their own safety. This here is going to be hopefully our cross station, and it actually is an area that is actually really close to the church itself. In fact, if you come up through here, you can actually see that there's a cross right by the side of the building, and you can see that through here it makes sense to create a cross station that reflects that, perhaps with a bit of an amphitheater effect where we might have one day some semicircular seating in here so that people can just muse. Maybe some slight coverings to make it all weather as well, so that people even can come on a rainy day and ponder the cross and ask the Lord some questions and perhaps pray as they go. And here's the exit out of that particular, we call this area like stations, like it's called kind of like the stations of the cross, but we also call them pearls because they're sort of pearls on a chain, areas where we widened out the area to develop a certain theme. Now we haven't developed every area in terms of what we'd like to see thematically, but that's part of the process as we go along. Things are pretty new. We just got the perimeter trail down after all, so we're still thinking in these terms and exploring the options and avenues. Now this area here, which is near the church parking lot, of course, has a lot of southern exposure. And there was a member of the church once upon a time who just built this as a way for pedestrians to come into the church property without necessarily having vehicles come in, because this is one of those entrances we just like minimal access to, not necessarily car access to, or vehicular access. So what we're thinking about is actually in this area building a pergola. That would be the long-term hope, and all pending financing, of course, and things like that. And perhaps actually in here somewhere on the ground, maybe not on the shady side, but unless it's tall, but to expose it some sun here, to plant specifically grapevines, because if we'd like to, this is as the most southern exposure, we'd like to actually put a grape-based pergola here, so that who knows, if it's fruitful, we might even be able to have some vintage to create maybe a bottle of wine to send it as a gift to a liturgical church in the valley or somewhere else, and just say this came from church property to use for communion. So who knows what will happen out of that, but that's something that we could think about from a standpoint of something a little different as a gift to those folks in the valley who are our brothers and sisters in Christ in other traditions. Once we get beyond that, we plunge back in, and ever so often you'll come across these particular stumps that are having vegetation on the top of them. And of course, there's a number of Jesse stumps, you could say, along the way, where trees are actually growing out at the top, and they're very reminiscent of that whole line in Scripture that references, a shoot shall come from the stump of Jesse, talking about the Davidic line and the Messianic line. So we probably will put some signage in there to remind people of those particular elements as well. So we're heading on to the second pearl, you could say, and this is kind of a nice little area here. There's a street here fairly close to us, but it's very, very quiet here, so that's kind of nice. And it meanders through, once again, more cedar. There's a little bit, there's a spruce in there, so occasionally there's some spruce out in the back here, which is kind of interesting too. And you'll see coming up here on my right, there's this is actually an area that is technically the septic field of the church, but it can be used for foot traffic. There's no problem at all. And with some modification, we can turn even areas like this and make them into sort of monument areas. There's some staking here going on because there's a rough basis of where the garden trail will take off. What we're on here right now is a perimeter trail, which is the main prayer trail, but there will be a garden area developed that goes, sort of meanders around in the general area over there, and we hope to plant some very, very meaningful plants that are biblically meaningful and things like that can, I think, make it a different kind of experience for people who actually like to walk and pray. And this is part of it too. There will be areas, of course, along the trail where we will plant some concrete pads down to add for benches. So we're figuring about, to put in the actual pads will be probably about $200 each or so, and then over the course of time we'll choose a standardized design for a bench, and hopefully that'll give it a consistent look across the way. This is another one of those stations, another one of those wider pearls on the chain. We're not entirely sure what this particular area will be dedicated to thematically, but we've got ideas, everything from a pro-life station to a Prayer for Canada station, so it might have distance areas where where the provincial capitals are, where Ottawa is and its directions, and so on and so forth, and to give it a sense of it being able to pray for the nation. That's one idea for sure. We haven't yet scoped out the actual areas whereby the benches would be put, and I can imagine that there might be areas that we just simply continue to add to over the course of time. But we kind of had plans for maybe an initial, 4 or 5 benches to start, at least the pads, and then as people care to give and add benches maybe dedicated to the memory of certain family members or whatever along the trail, that can be done. So we pass sort of on the darker, well, I guess on the cooler side, I guess you could say, of the property, a little bit more dense vegetation in here. It also meanders quite nicely amongst the trees. And the ferns, there's a kind of a growing kind of fern area that happens at the back here. The entire church property is about 5 acres, so we're just going around the perimeter in a gigantic kind of U shape is really what's going on. Just for people who need some orientation in the matter. Now, somewhere along in here, it might be an idea one day to flatten out one of these areas and actually put in maybe a small mini chapel type structure in here where people can just slip inside a little church-shaped building, as we kind of have explored those particular types of dynamics as well, and that understanding might be something to consider as we go forward. And that's something to add. I guess you can probably get those house kits that are probably from Home Depot and things like that, and probably convert them into a house with a steeple and everything else, and then put some actual pews inside of a miniature variety and see how it goes. I also want to point your attention to this now. We don't want to disturb them too much, but right through there is the actual largest anthill on the property. So we'll probably put a sign in here, I would think, talking about Proverbs 30 and the answer of people. And so that's kind of interesting. In the summertime, they're all asleep right now, pretty much. But in the summertime, there's probably, I don't know, who knows, tens of thousands of ants that are living there. They're all moving wood, little kind of matchstick size pieces of wood, and building that fairly high each year. We don't want to disturb them. There's probably an ant freeway that comes across here and heads on out about 300 feet or more before it peters out. I've tracked that. It's kind of interesting to see. So fascinating people, and the Bible calls them a people, and that's interesting that the Hebrew word that is used there is exactly the same for people of the human persuasion. So it's really kind of an interesting one. And here, these stakes here are where the garden trail enters from this side and comes up to rejoin the perimeter trail as well. So it just heads on down through there back towards the church. Coming up on another potential station here too. It's a widened area, a pearl-like area. This is the area that on the property is it's closer to a commercial area here, but of course when it's springtime, all of that will fill in, and the berms have been built in behind and will be added to later on, and we'll get a nice cozy sense of feeling in here. This is the area where we have the most holly trees. And so you can pretty well bank on the fact that we're going to have some signage around the quotation of the famous Christmas carol of the holly and the ivy here, and how that relates to Christ. And this is a fairly quiet station area as well, so maybe we'll put maybe a pro-life station here. I don't know exactly yet what we'll put in here, but certainly an area where we can pray a little bit more quietly in the quiet of the day here. I love this trek too when we sometimes get, you know, close. How many times does it we pass through two different cedars as kind of a gate? It's kind of fascinating too. So that's a neat thing to do, and you get a little bit more of a sense of the fern population and forest element here, which is kind of nice. Coming up here, you might see something that is kind of odd, like why did we leave it? But I wanted to actually at least explore the idea at some particular point of utilizing this particular cedar, which is close to dying actually here on its own, because it looks, when you look at it, it's like a giant boat prow. So, you know, we can talk about Jonah, we can talk about the ark, we can talk about Paul's fun time in the book of Acts, of the shipwreck on Malta. There's an awful lot of naval imagery, you could say, maritime imagery that we can use with respect to this particular metaphor in tree form. And so we've left it, and we're going to ponder that as we go. I mean, some of you will understand that even the inside of a church sanctuary has a portion that's called a nave, which is the same sense as we get from the word naval. So, you know, there's an awful lot of maritime type imagery that we can utilize with respect to that, and that's why we've kept that symbol where it is. Where it is. Still building the berms on the left-hand side of your screen. There's some property along here where it's used for storage for different vehicles, boats, and things like that. So we'll be kind of cozyfying this property here as we kind of build the berms along a little bit better and move the earth to make it a little bit more intimate inside here as well. And of course, there's lots of things to clean up in the meantime, and there's still work to be done with respect to that, even as the trail is really, really nicely hardening underneath my feet here. It's a really good, solid trail, and I want to thank Class Enterprises once again for their work here. I think they were not only sensitive to the concept of actually of a prayer trail in general because of you know, their faith, but also they did an excellent job in terms of helping us out here, and it's in really good shape. It's a really good foundation for trails here. Coming up actually in just a little bit, we have our second area for a bridge. So there's an opportunity here to work with a little bit more water in times to come. So that's kind of nice. We hopefully will put in maybe enough of a collection ability to have a little bit more of a deeper water area. Not something that's going to be too dangerous for young people or anything like that, but just maybe something that'll create a little bit of noise, because it's nice to have water, running water. You can see that it's certainly here, especially at this time of year, because of course this is the rainy season technically on the coast of British Columbia. So there's lots of rain coming down between November and the end of January, and this year's been no exception. There's already about 340 centimeters on top of Mount Washington just to our west, and there's been a lot of rain that's fallen down here, but other than that, it begins to clear off towards February and March, and we get a little bit more of a balanced climate, quite a unique climate. As we sort of begin to approach Pritchard Road a little bit further on down, we do a little bit more meandering, and there's an opportunity in the midst of this for different types of things as well. There could be actually one day right out in there another widened area to be a pearl in the chain, you could say, or a station of a particular theme. And we've also considered whether we should put in a military theme because of the military base that's not too far away for soldiers and airmen and more. And so there's that opportunity too. And so we'll see how those things develop over the course of time. And you can certainly pray along with us as we think on these things and attempt to make this the most meaningful it can be. There's bits of nice more meandering up here as well. You can see the church structure through the trees once again, and that's the general side of it there. The area was logged off at one particular point, maybe around the 1920s, and that's why there are these sizable stumps of original forest, which must have been quite something to behold. But the replacement firs and cedar have been I've had about probably 80 or 90 years to grow, and some of them are looking pretty good. Some of them may be approaching 100 years now, so that's kind of nice. So nice to have that property. And you can see the steam that's coming off the moisture that has fallen, and yet the sunshine this morning. This is the actual area around where we hope to have out here a nativity display area. So this area might be one day used for caroling or something, I don't know, but in any case we'll remove maybe one or two of the branches of that particular tree and open this area up a little bit for a permanent possibility of a nativity display, and so it'll catch the traffic, and hopefully it'll be kind of an interesting way to testify to the seasonal element as well as we think on these things. And had some opportunities for some strange chats, unbidden chats with electronic technicians who might be able to produce some things, some very interesting things with respect to nativity displays and lighting. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see what the Lord does. It's interesting to just put your kind of hopes out there in faith and see how the Lord provides for those ideas and those visions. But this is a possibility in here. And one of the things that did indeed come to my mind during the last Christmas season, where we weren't able to really, obviously worship in the same sense because of the COVID situation, is that, it begs the question of whether we can produce a unique type of prayer trail walk during the Christmas season in 2021, where we might have a kind of a Christian luminaria or something along the trail, and have carolers that carol in the various stations and things like that, and light it up a little bit better, and we'll see how that thing's developed. So there's opportunities galore with respect to this in terms of helping the community out, helping local intercessors out to give them a place outside to pray that's kind of unique. And we certainly commend to the rest of the Christian community the trail that's being built here, that they're certainly welcome to come on down if they're feeling nudged by the Holy Spirit to just be in a place of relative meaning. And in any case, we're glad you could join me today, and God bless you all, and we'll hopefully catch you on the trail sometime. Amen.